Welcome back to the second part of this video on section 3.7. In the previous part we went through three questions that were word problems from section 3.7. Some of the more basic questions talked about the process for solving these percent problems, and I mentioned that we could go into some more complicated questions in the second half of this video. I wanted to break the video into two halves so that they wouldn't be too long. That way you can more easily skip around to see the question that you need help with. The main process that we used was to identify the amount, rate, and base in each question, and then put those things into this particular formula: amount equals rate times base. Well, I'm going to skip around because I know that there are a couple questions in here that often give people difficulty, so I'm going to see if I can find some of those questions. If you have a request for a particular question, I can always record a third video in this series, so please send me a Dropbox, or you can always set up a tutoring appointment as well. So the one that I want to do next, I'll see if I can find it. It's going to take me a moment. Oh, I'm going to have to start over from the beginning. The one that I want to find next is the author of a textbook question, so let's see if we can find that one. Because that one introduces a very important concept of the complement of a percentage. And here we go. The author of a book was told that he would have to cut the number of pages by 21% for the book to sell at a popular price and still make a profit. If these cuts were made, what percent of the original number of pages was in the final version? That's step one. Okay, so we are cutting 21%, and they're asking us if 21% was cut, what percentage of the original number remained in the final version. So they gave us a percent and they're asking us for a percent. This is a situation where we're not actually using this amount rate base formula. We're using the fact that 100% is everything, is your total. And usually every percentage tells you one part of that total, but there's this other part of the total that's hiding in the background. It's whatever's left over. And in this question, that's what they're asking us for. They're saying, hey, 21% of the pages were cut. What percentage of the pages were left over? What percent remain? This also happens to come up a lot in discount problems when you're looking at discounts on sales. Hey, if something's 25% off, what percent do you still have to pay? It's that other part of the 100. To find that amount, which is called the complement, you're going to subtract from 100. So in this case, I'm going to have to do 100%, because that's everything, minus the 21% we got rid of, should give us the percent that remain, and that's going to be 79%. If this seems too easy, well, you're right, this is actually not too bad. You're just subtracting from 100 each time you do this. But the trick is it's not always easy to tell from a particular word problem right off the bat whether they're going to ask you to use the percent they gave you as the rate or the complement as the rate. You always have to sort of think things through. So let's give them that and move on to the next part. So step 2, if the finished book contains 401 pages, how many pages were in the original form? Well, here's a question that's going to ask us to use this amount, rate, and base process, this formula that we used before. But we've got to be careful, because they clued us off in step 1 that there's actually two possible percentages that we could use in that amount, rate, and base format for the rate. It's tempting to use the 21% as the rate, but let's think through what these two rates are. 21% is what got cut, so those are gone. And the 79% is the percent that remain. Let's take a look at the other number they gave us and see which one of those two things it matches up with. The finished book contains 401 pages. Well, does that mean 401 pages were cut or 401 pages remain? It means 401 pages remain, so I need to use the percentage that goes along with that, which is the 79%. So pay attention to those things when you're doing these word problems. There's at least one other question in here that uses a complement, and they don't clue you in step 1. You have to think things through. So here, 79% is going to be the rate that I use. Well, I've got 401 pages that remain, and they want to know how many pages were in the original. Well, here's a good clue word right here. The original is what I'm looking for. Take a look at the amount and the base and think through what that original is. That's right, it's going to be the base. It says original right there, doesn't it? The base is always your original or your total value. And so in this case, that's my unknown. I don't know what the base is. But they did give me this amount of 401. So let's see if we can work this one through. Again, I'm going to use my formula of amount equals rate times base. And underneath each of those letters, I'm going to go ahead and write in whatever that particular letter corresponds to, whatever number goes with it. Before we do anything else, we ought to change that 79% into a decimal. So I don't see a decimal point there. Starts at the far right, moves once, twice. It's moving under a number each time. There's two digits there. So I don't need a placeholder 0. That's just going to be 0.79. So let's write these things out. My amount, well, that A is 401 pages. I can bring my equal sign down. That always comes right after the amount. The rate is 0.79, or 0.79 if you want that leading 0, times, and I don't know what the base is, so I'm going to put B. Taking a look at this formula, we don't have A equals. We have a multiplication involving a variable, involving one of those letters that we don't know. So it's 0.79 times B. And if you recall from the previous example, whenever you're multiplying a number with B, or with an unknown, with a letter, that's what you're going to have to divide by. You want to divide both sides by the number that is being multiplied with your unknown. And for these questions in this particular section, you can always do left divided by right. That won't work in general, though, so do understand that you're always dividing by the number that's multiplied with a number. So I'm going to divide by 0.79 here. Don't forget the decimal point. That's a classic mistake. And again, I'm going to pull up my calculator to do this because this is a horrible decimal division. I doubt that this will come out nice. So 401 divided by 0.79. Let's see what we get. Whoa, that is a horrible number. 507.5949 and all sorts of other rubbish. So let's write this down. We'll do maybe a couple digits after the decimal. 507.5949. Oops. Alright, and this keeps going. I'm going to put some ellipses, that dot dot dot, to say that this thing keeps on going forever and ever and ever. And let's read the fine print here. It says, round your answer to the nearest integer. Now what does that mean? That might not be familiar wording for you. That means round it to the ones place, to the nearest whole number. So I'm going to go back to my rounding rules from previous weeks. And remember that when you're rounding, you identify the place value first. That's the ones. And then you have to decide, do you round that up or keep it the same? Well, since it's followed by a 5 or more, you round up. So the underlined number, that 7, is going to round up to an 8. Alright, so this is going to be 508 pages. Oops, let's put that back in black. So 508 pages will be my final answer here. Oops, let's not hit a typo. You got to be careful here. Don't want to do all that work and then accidentally type it in wrong. And let's see, good job. And again, they're shouting my name at me in all capitals. Great. One thing that I'll mention is I do encourage you strongly to write these out in your notebook, to take notes on these. You don't have to type them like I'm doing here, but I would recommend that you do them by hand when you're doing these because these are multi-step questions. But if you ever happen to, say, do one on the sly and not write it out, you can always find your previous steps just by clicking on this thing. So if you had forgotten the 79%, it's there for you. So I'm going to hit next. And here they say if the finished book contains 401 pages, how many pages were cut? Well, you could do this by setting up an equation again, but there's an easier way to do this, which is to look at the number of pages in the original, which is 508, and realize that if 401 pages were left, we just have to subtract those to figure out how many were cut. So I can just do 508 minus 401. And that's a pretty straightforward subtraction. 8 minus 1 is 7, 0 minus 0 is 0, and 5 minus 4 is 1, so that should be 107, 107 pages. And they're happy with that. Great. Okay, another question that often gets people is this question about a man who is losing weight and then he gains weight back. This poor guy is losing weight and gaining weight all the time. So let's see what happens to him. Let's see how this particular question works. This is a difficult one for many people because there are so many numbers in it that are completely superfluous. You don't really need to use them at all. Don't worry about the months in this question. Those months are just there as labels, essentially. So, a man weighed 295 pounds. He lost 25 pounds in 3 months, and then he gained 40 pounds back 5 months later. What percent of his weight did he lose in the first 3 months? Again, follow the problem-solving process and round your answer to the nearest hundredth in this case. Okay, well, this man weighed 295 pounds and he lost 25 pounds in the first 3 months. Full stop. They're asking us here in step 1, what happened in the first 3 months? That means all this stuff that happened 5 months later I don't care about. At least not for this step. The 3 months, as I mentioned, is just a label, so I can ignore that too. The only numbers that really matter here are that he weighed 295 pounds and he lost 25 pounds. Lastly, they're asking me what percent. What percent? Well, that sounds like a rate to me. And since they're asking me about it, that's what my final answer ought to be. I don't know the rate. They're asking me what percent. So I need to find out what that percentage is. And I'm going to use the 295 and the 25. One of those is the amount, one of those is the base. So think about it for a second. It shouldn't be too difficult to think which one of those is part of the other one and which one's the original, total, or whole. Pause the video and see if you can think of which one is which. Alright, did you figure it out? Some people make the mistake of just putting these down in order, but think it through. You have to actually think about what these numbers mean. So he originally weighed 295 pounds. He lost 25 pounds. That 25 pounds that he lost is part of his original weight. And his original weight should tell you base. So the 25 pounds is my amount, and the base is 295. Oops, that didn't type. Sorry. There we go. So let's go ahead and write our formula. Amount equals rate times base. And for this particular question, I know the amount and the base, so I'm going to go ahead and fill those in. I don't know the rate. So amount, rate, and base. And I'm drawing these arrows just to emphasize that I always write these things directly underneath. So here we go. Amount is 25 pounds. I bring down my equals. My rate I don't know. Times my base, which we identified B is 295. Okay, we've done enough of these so that you probably should have a good idea of what to do here to solve this. We can't just multiply because R is being multiplied by 295 and I don't know what R is. So see if you can decide on what step to take next. Go ahead and pause and try it out. Okay, did you figure out what we need to do? In this particular case, we need to divide by 295. So it'll be 25 divided by 295. I'm going to use fraction bars to indicate the division here. I'm going to do it on both sides. And I'm dividing by the number that's being multiplied with the R, the 295. I do it on both sides because that's the way algebra typically works. You balance equations out. And 295 divided by 295 just cancels out, but this is the real meat of the question. 25 divided by 295. Always top divided by bottom. So for these questions, again, as a bit of a crutch, you can always go with the left divided by the right, but get used to thinking about it the other way, dividing by the number that's with your letter that's being multiplied with the variable. And let's type this in. 25 divided by 295. Ooh, that's terrible looking. So I'm going to just copy this number here and paste it in because this is an awful looking decimal. This is a horrible looking number. Numbers that look like this have a technical name. These are called ugly numbers. No, I'm just kidding. But this is an ugly looking number. Isn't that horrible? So a lot of people see this and they panic and they think they did it wrong. Nope, not necessarily. Some of these questions just have really horrible looking decimals as answers. But you're not going to type that whole thing. You're going to read the fine print. And here's a place where it's easy to make a mistake. Round your answer to the nearest hundredth if necessary. be careful. Rounding is always the very last step that you do in a problem, and there's actually one thing that we need to do before we round. Now, what could we possibly need to do? That's my R, right? But rate is a percentage, and that's a decimal. So before you round, make sure you change that decimal to a percent. So this decimal point has to move once, twice before I round, and it's going to be between the 8 and the 4. Now, why is that important? Because they're saying to round to the nearest hundredth, and my nearest hundredth now is different. So let's take a look at what this number now looks like. Oops, didn't want that in blue. Let me write it again this way. And so my decimal point moved to being between the 8 and the 4. And now my hundredths place is always 2 digits to the right of that decimal. So it's the 7. Not the same as the hundredths place of your original decimal, which would have been the 8. But since I moved my decimal point twice to change it from a decimal to a percent, that changes where the hundredths place is. So my hundredths place is the 7. I look after that, and it's followed by a 4, so I don't round the 7 up. It's just going to be 8.47%. Oops, and excuse me, I typed the percent sign in, but there's actually a percent sign here already for me, so I don't have to type the percent sign in for that one. So I'm going to submit, and they are happy. Okay, let's try the next part of this, step 2. And again, this is part of this question that throws people off fairly frequently. It looks like they're asking me for something similar here, and they are. They're saying after his initial weight loss, what percent of his weight did he gain back? So we're looking for the rate again, but the amount and the base have both changed. So here's where you have to be a bit careful. My amount, well, they're saying after his initial weight loss, so what happened? They want to know about the 40 pounds that he gained back. Well, that's going to be my amount, just like before. The amount of weight that he's losing or gaining is going to be your amount. So I've got a 40 here. But my base is no longer 295 because he lost 25 pounds in that first 3 months. So I have to deduct the 25 pounds from his original weight, 295 minus 25 pounds. So when I subtract that off, I'm going to get 295 minus 25. 5 minus 5 is 0, and 9 minus 2 is 7. So that's going to be 270 pounds. I'll put my little equal sign there. And that will be my new base. So that gives me an amount equals a rate times a base. And again, you just replace each letter with the number that goes with it. And you might already kind of know what to do here, but I strongly encourage you again to write this stuff out. Even if you feel like you know how to do it without writing it out, do yourself a favor, because later on when we get into heavier algebra, writing out each step is going to be crucial to being successful. So my A I replaced with 40. My R, I don't know, so I'm going to write R. Bring down that equal sign, of course, too. And then times B, which is 270, we said. All right. So see if you can bring this one home. Work out the rest of the question. Hit pause, work out the rest of the question, and then we can compare notes when you're done. All right. So did you try this one out? Let's see. I'm going to divide by the 270. So, oops. And again, I'm going to punch that into the calculator. That's a division that I definitely don't want to do by hand. It'll take forever. 40 divided by 270. And that gives me this horrible decimal, 0.148148, and those 148s pretty much keep on going forever. That repeating decimal will go on forever. Oops, let me not write that in blue. And again, we're going to have to change that to a decimal, to a percent. So I'm moving the decimal place twice. So that's going to be 14 point a bunch of horrible numbers percent. And then last but not least, because they say round to the hundredth, I'm going to look at my hundredths place, which is that second digit after the decimal. It's the 1. And it's followed by a 4, so you don't round it up. 14.81%. And I'll submit. Alright, so those two questions are probably the two most difficult ones on there, or the two that give people the most difficulty. If you'd like to see some more questions worked out, send me a Dropbox or post something along those lines in the homework if you'd like, and I'll be happy to record some more videos going over some of the other questions in this assignment. But hopefully going over these 5 questions in 2 videos will be enough to give you a head start and hopefully help you if you get stuck on any of those.